Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuhu. My name is Norjana D. Adi, reporter for today. So now we will discuss the international trade in historical perspective. So without saying that long-distance trade plays an important role in modern economies, but it was already a salient feature of economic development after the Neolithic Revolution. Caravans traveled along the Fertile Crescent trading between Mesopotamia and the Levant 3 millennia ago. Over time, trading routes expanded to distant parts of Asia and Europe. The Roman Empire managed an extensive network of trade which bound together Europe, Western Asia, and Northern Africa. The collapse of the western part of the Roman Empire in the 5th century brought many of these developments to a halt. Nevertheless, long-distance trade continued, although to a lesser extent. Historians have documented in great detail of the evolution of communication and the mobility of people across distant regions during that period. Developments that were particularly pronounced during the Carolingian Empire in the 8th century. European imports of spices were replaced then by imports of exotic medicines and new drugs developed by Arab pharmacology, while silk continued to flow into Northwest. To pay for these imports, Europe produced a rather narrow range of high-value, low-bulk goods, textiles, tin, Frankish swords, but primarily European slaves. The Middle Ages saw an expansion of trade with the rise of city-states such as Venice and Genoa, and the advent of the Commercial Revolution. The discovery of America by Christopher Columbus in 1492 and the discovery of the passage to the East Indies via the Cape of Good Hope by Vasco da Gama in 1498 had monumental effects on world history and on long-distance trade. Historians dispute the immediate impact of these discoveries, but no one doubts that the Iberian states of Portugal, Castile, and Aragon were soon affected, and the rest of the world was influenced in the following centuries. Particularly important were these developments for European countries with access to the Atlantic Ocean, in which the new commercial opportunities shook up the social and political order and led to a new balance of power between nobility, the merchants, and the crown. But how important were these discoveries for the global integration of markets? So, some historians argue that world markets were integrated before this age of discovery. Others argue that integration started in earnest only afterwards, with the advent of the Industrial Revolution. In particular, while the discovery of the New World and the passage to the Indies played a prominent role in the evolution of the European economies in the centuries to come, the volume of world trade relative to income remained very small until the 19th century. Then now, for this picture shows the evolution of world trade from the early 19th century to the early 1990s. It clearly identifies two waves of globalizations. One that started in the second half of the 19th century and that lasted until World War I. And the second that started after World War II and proceeds until this very day. Initially, the share of this trade in income was 2% and it exceeded 25% in 1992. While long-distance trade was related to economic development, the interdependence between them was complex. In particular, long-distance trade affected economic development, and economic development affected trade. Moreover, the influence of trade on development operated through multiple channels, including the institutional and political. Long-distance trade in the aftermath of the discovery of the Americas is often cited as the major event that contributed to divergence in economic condition between Europe and China. Although Europe and China were similarly advanced in the 18th century, the Industrial Revolution took place in Europe, as a result of which Europe grew faster than China, eventually leading to large gaps in income per capita that have been closing only in recent years. Naturally, the Industrial Revolution was not driven by trade, but trade was an indispensable contributing factor. So, some studies point out that European growth in the post-1500 period was concentrated in countries with access to the Atlantic Ocean: Britain, France, the Netherlands, Portugal, and Spain. Countries that engaged in trade with the New World and acquired overseas colonies. These commercial opportunities strengthened the political power of merchant groups and entrepreneurs and weakened the power of monarchs. As a result, constraints on the executive were broadened and property rights became more secure for a larger segment of society. These unintended consequences of trade with the New World enabled the Atlantic traders to forge ahead of the other European countries. So yet trade with the New World also had negative effects in Spain, where Castilian institutions proved to be inadequate in limiting the power of Philip II. The flow of silver from the Americas encouraged Philip II to engage in wars that eventually became too expensive and required domestic taxes and large loans from foreign bankers. So the ensuing struggles between the crown and the Cortes weakened domestic institutions, and this had unfortunate consequences for Spanish economic growth. Evidently, the historical record shows that long-distance trade interact in complex ways with economic development, and that it played an important role in the evolution of the world's economy. Therefore, important to understand what drives such trade and how it impacts economic outcomes. So, unlike the natural sciences, in which important research objects do not change over time, in the social sciences generally and in economics particularly, the objects of research reshape over time. In this respect, international trade is no exception. When countries and regions transform as a result of economic, technological, political, or institutional change, the nature of foreign trade and its causes and consequences change too. Moreover, such changes are not rare in historical perspective, but rather frequent. As a result, the thinking on this subject has been repeatedly adapted to varying circumstances. The history of thought on international trade, with its interplay between theory and evidence, is fascinating. The chain of theorizing empirical investigation that confirms parts of the theory and contradicts others, and updating of the theory in view of new evidence has propelled advances in the research for 2 centuries. Moreover, this pattern has been unavoidable in view of the changing nature of international economic interaction. In other words, theories that had been suitable at one point in time became less appropriate as national economies, and with them, patterns of international specialization changed. And now, this was the end of my topic, and we will continue by Miss Muana Abubakar.